How does Oregon's offensive line match up against the Oregon State front? Well, that's a question mark on the Oregon side of things, Carter, because Oregon fans probably wouldn't be able to tell you. I wouldn't be able to tell you definitively what the starting offensive line is going to look like. Is Matthew Bedford going to play? If he doesn't play, do they go with the unit where Poncho's at center, Harper's at right guard, Strother at left guard? That unit seemed to have more success, particularly with the ground game in the second half against Boise State. There are a lot of questions there. How capable is this Oregon State front four of exploiting the Ducks' offensive line woes early in the season?
Pretty capable, I think. Like we saw last week.
That's a ringing endorsement.
Well, again, it's because we haven't seen the Beavers play an opponent with a pulse. And
Gotcha.
Last week's San Diego State team was rolling out a true freshman quarterback who had a bum knee. It's just not a good San Diego State team, and Oregon State shut it out, which is exactly what you should do against a team of that caliber. So, credit to the Beavers for getting that job done. This is a test, unlike one that Oregon State has had so far. So I can't give it a huge endorsement, but I do have some confidence because of the talent Oregon State has on that front seven, and particularly at middle linebacker. Melvin Jordan IV, Isaiah Chisholm it's another fantastic inside linebacker duo. Oregon State's had a bunch of them over the last handful of years, and it's got another one with these two guys who are both two of the highest rated commits to Jonathan Smith during his tenure. Trent Bray was the lead recruiter there because they're inside linebackers. That's his position, and they stuck around and they're playing for him, and they're playing really well for him. I think they're two guys with Oregon's struggles on the offensive line, I think so glaringly coming in the middle and at that center position. I think that's where Oregon State's strength being in the middle of the defense comes into play, because all you got to do is bring those two guys down, give you a little bit more push in the middle of that defensive front. And I think you can wreak some havoc up the middle, whether that's stopping the run game, whether that's getting a little bit of pressure on Gabriel up the middle as opposed to off the edges. I think that's a nice little area for Oregon State to flex its defensive muscles. And then the back end of the defense is no slouch either. I mean, it's a very deep secondary with a lot of experience, but I think I like the matchup more for the Beavers up front than I do in the back end, containing those elite Oregon receivers and all that speed that they've got outside.
Yeah, I love the Oregon receivers every single week because they legitimately go 3-4 guys deep of players who can lead the Ducks in receiving in any given week. Saw Trayshawn Holden break a 59-yard touchdown last week, and he came on strong at the end of last year. Tez Johnson had 3 catches for -1 yard last week against Boise State. Could be in for a big day, but he takes a step back, and Evan Stewart takes a step forward, has his first 100-yard game as a Duck, catching a couple long passes down the field. But I think that offensive line, defensive line matchup ultimately defines this game, Carter, because if the offensive line takes a major step forward for the Ducks, they protect Dylan Gabriel consistently, and they're able to run the football, I don't see Oregon State's offense as being able to keep up with Oregon's, and that's the key for the Beavers' defense. If you cause havoc up front, we've seen the last couple of weeks, you disrupt Oregon's offense, it is not operating at peak efficiency. But if they get even just a couple of steps closer, I do not have confidence in Oregon State's quarterback-wide receiver combination to keep up with what the Ducks could do.
This Oregon State team and frankly the program over probably the last 5 or 6 years is at its best when it is keeping opponents in check on the defensive front, because Oregon State, like I said in the beginning of this, it's a team that wants to limit possessions, keep things close, control time of possession, and kind of wear you down as the game goes. And that works really well if you're in a close game, or if you've got physical advantages at other positions that you can kind of exploit from time to time. But this matchup is so dependent on Oregon State not allowing Oregon to score a bunch of points, because the way that Oregon State operates offensively isn't geared towards scoring in the snap of a finger. Like, Oregon State needs 5 minutes to go grind it through the offensive line, find holes in the defense with the running game. It's not going to go over the top and beat you offensively. Now, the play action, Oregon State sets up the play action really well because you have to respect the running game, but that's not the bread and butter. Whereas like with Oregon, you can get those speedy guys out in space and break one free. That's just not the way Oregon State operates. So if Oregon puts up 35 points or more, I think it's probably out of reach.
I think that 30 is the magic number for Oregon. I think if you get there, I feel confident in Oregon's ability to keep the Beavers under 30 points. And I know that Ashton Genty and company ran wild last week. Jam Griffin's a great player. He's not Ashton Genty. He's really good, though. And Oregon fans should remember that from 2022. He was one of the backs going wild when the defense couldn't make an adjustment and couldn't stop the rushing attack. If Oregon State's going to win this game, Carter, it feels like it's a 21-17 sort of game, or 24-20, keep it in that range. If you start to get into a track meet, though, I do feel confident in Oregon, because if you're at that point where Oregon's scoring that often, probably means they've cleaned up the offensive line issues, or they're getting a consistent push, they're protecting Dylan Gabriel, and he's able to take some shots down the field. I want to flip over, though, because this Oregon defensive line, I've talked about it a lot all offseason coming into the year. They're living up to the hype for me. This looks like the best Oregon defensive front since 2014, when you had Eric Armstead, DeForest Buckner. Now, are there 2 top 10 NFL draft picks on this defensive line? No. But the overall depth of talent, and there are multiple NFL guys on this defensive front for Oregon, that is the strength of the defense. And I think they, along with the secondary, for the most part, have been the best parts of the Oregon defense through the first couple of games. They've been wreaking havoc. They're getting a push. They're rushing the passer. They're just not allowing a high completion percentage. You go look at the quarterback stats from Idaho and Boise State's guys in the first couple of weeks. I'm pretty sure they're both under 50%. I know Matson was last week. He was 18 of 40, and the secondary deserves a lot of credit for that as well. How do you feel about this Oregon State offensive line?
I don't think it's quite as strong as it was when Jim Mihalichuk was coaching that group. I mean, he's one of the great offensive line coaches in the country. But Oregon State still does have quite a few pieces from those groups. Josh Gray manning the left guard position. He was always at tackle the last couple of times these teams played. So Oregon's going to have to adjust to him being at left guard. And I think that can be something that Oregon State uses, where if you just run Griffin behind Gray, your strongest asset, run to that left side against a team that's not used to him being there. Like, maybe that works a little bit until the team adjusts. I would imagine Oregon's going to have a good plan for that, though. They're going to have their gap fits set in stone, but
they have to be sharper than they were last week, because when Genty broke the 70-yard touchdown, I don't even know if he was touched, and that should not ever happen. It wasn't anything special. It was just, here's inside zone, and he had a couple of bad run fits, and he broke a long one.
Yeah. Oregon State hasn't broken the long runs this year that it did with like a Damian Martinez, Jamar Jefferson. So that's something that I think we're still waiting to see if that's going to be part of their game. A lot of that does come back to the offensive line, because when Oregon State was breaking those long runs, and they broke quite a few of them in the 22 game, it was because there was no defenders at the line of scrimmage. So it's an area to watch for sure. Is this Oregon State offensive line at the level where it was in the past, where it can just move guys like Mateo Uyunglele out of there and Jordan Birch out of there?
Yeah, and I think DJ Harmon goes in that conversation. Pro Football Focus has got him rated as, I think, one of the 10 best interior guys through the first 2 weeks of the college football season. And that matches what we have seen. He's been disruptive, he's been active, and exactly what we were excited about when he transferred to the Ducks from Michigan State.